This presentation is going to be on how to incorporate Talkspace into higher education. Talkspace is a new, fairly new mobile online app-based texting psychotherapy service. It's very unique. The AMFT Code of Ethics makes it very clear that we have to, as MFT interns or licensed MFTs, that we got to engage in some sort of training regarding using technology based clinical services. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like that many programs, even AMFT accredited programs, have a class based on teaching us how to properly watch out for ethics issues or maintain confidentiality or the unique interventions of technology based services. So this is Talkspace's website, and Talkspace, it was invented in 2012 by a guy named Ronnie Frank, and of course it's an online mobile therapy application. Talkspace features over 2,000 licensed therapists who vary from MFTs, CPCs, LCSWs, and some doctorate level therapists. Currently, Talkspace reports that they have over 500,000 clients. So, due to its growing popularity, I feel there should be at least an elective, like a one credit class on Talkspace style practicums, Talkspace style interventions. As you can see here, Talkspace it has this algorithm style assessment procedure. Before you see any therapist, they have this automated assessment. Talkspace is also compatible with laptops, smartphones, tablets. They do it under an unlimited texting style. The platform works practically through texting. Usually, you collaborate with the therapist based on how many times it's appropriate to text them throughout the day. Usually, it's at least 2 times a day, from my understanding. There's also couples counseling and more of telemedicine, like the Skype and the VC style psychotherapy on Talkspace. That's also available. The assessment procedure to what the therapist the most is most compatible to you is it could be very good multiculturally. Where my mind goes about that is that the studies on racial match, like the studies that show that culturally some cultures prefer a racial matched therapist, like African Americans, and some cultures reject a racially matched therapist, like Asian Americans actually report that they don't want another Asian therapist. And so I feel like the assessment procedure is actually quite effective. Talkspace is unique because it's also completely anonymous. You don't even have to give your name to the therapist if you don't want to. It's HIPAA compliant. There in 2016 there was an audit to see if Talkspace was HIPAA compliant, and their reports show that they did very well. Um, so I guess my argument is there should be a class or an internship based on the technology-based therapy applications. It's so increasingly popular. Like I mentioned earlier, there's 500,000 clients nowadays. There's 2,000 therapists that are enrolled in this program. So I feel like it's something that should probably be done at least as a one credit elective. Here's some major pros and cons, and we'll start with the pros, of course. Mobility issues, clients who have a difficult time due to physical limitations. Maybe they're a little lesser abled. Talkspace is certainly very um, compatible with them. Also, rural areas, that's something I know a lot about. I live in the most rural area in the world. And, sometimes my clients have to drive 50 or 60 miles just to see me. Here's just something that illustrates that. This is the town I live in. You can see it's very rural. It's extremely rural. I mean, it's like stuck in the early 1900s. Like we also mentioned, multiculturally could be a good thing. There's a lot of stigma and shame related to going to see a therapist in a lot of cultures, both in the Latino Hispanic cultures and East Asian cultures. Talkspace can be a great alternative to that. Additionally, the cost it's much cheaper than seeing a brick and mortar in person therapist. I believe Talkspace starts at $49 a month. It's also great for crisis issues. Someone could be having a panic attack at 2 in the morning, and they could text their therapist. And one of the other things is that it can be good for people who engage in extreme withdrawal. Of course, extreme withdrawal is actually a psychoanalytic concept. It's one of the lesser known ego defenses, and in extreme withdrawal, you make the assumption that people who think that reality is so painful, they split that off and they create a type of reality or a type of alternate life. Those are usually the type of people who play video games all day and do not have any interaction with other people. It's too terrifying. They'd rather be safe than um, take any risks of growing. And Talkspace might be a great alternative to get them out of the house or get them towards working towards seeing a real therapist. I mean, not a real therapist, but you know. Lastly, Talkspace can be great for people who are battling addictions. Like, at 12-step meetings, they always recommend you get a sponsor. And you call that sponsor whenever you have feelings of relapse. And Talkspace, because you can see or you can interact with your therapist immediately, anytime you want. It could be a very good thing for addictions. Here's actually a really cool clip of Irvin Yalom talking about how Talkspace can be used in internships and supervision.
Well, the more that I work with my supervisee, there's a lot of feelings I've had about toss space. One thing I should say, supervision is amazing with Talkspace because where else will you ever get a text of everything that's said between the patient and therapist? If I supervise students who are doing psychotherapy, they come in and they tell me about their last session with the patient, but it may be very far from reality unless you watch a video.
Right.
Yeah. So they tell me what's happened, but I really don't see it.
Yeah.
So the idea of having a total text of therapy is quite a wonderful opportunity, not only for supervision but also for research. And I know that there's research in process right now, but you've got tremendously rich data, everything that's happened between the patient and the text. Um, so that's one thing. Another thing is that the patient has available everything that's been said. Nicole tells me about a patient who pastes on her refrigerator some things that they've said in the text.
Yeah.
So that's something that's new. So what I want to say is it is not the same as my doing therapy. But it's something interesting. It's something else.
Yeah.
But I have more and more respect that something interesting is going on between them and their patients. So I'm very interested in what's going on, even though it's something that I myself don't do, and I'm not sure I could do it. It takes a different set of skills and a different kind of learning that has to go on.
This is incredible. I asked you about disadvantages, and you gave me so many advantages. That's beautiful. Well, that's okay. I'm glad.
So Irvin Yalom, he couldn't find too many disadvantages of Talkspace, but some writers have talked about some disadvantages. Most particularly, it's not compatible with some therapy approaches like the brief dynamic approaches, art therapy, music therapy, EMDR. In the brief dynamic therapies, they pay a lot of attention to body language because they believe that those are tactile defense mechanisms. EMDR, I mean, how it would be very, very difficult to do the eye movement part of the therapy without, looking at something at least. Process issues working in the transference related to process issues may be a little difficult as well. Like those questions like, if your tears had a voice, what would they be saying right now? It'll be kind of hard to assess for tears um, if you're just texting someone, of course. Talkspace did have that ethics issue back in 2016. I don't know if you guys recall, but it was sued by a former employee who accused him of breaching certain AMFT code of ethics. Um, One of them was about the transition. Talkspace, being a very for-profit business, doesn't tolerate this, and at times will deprive the client of transitions or proper terminations. Um, but this is very common amongst all for-profit agencies. Not all of them, but a lot of them. Additionally, ethics issues tend to be very common online. For example, when I do teletherapy, oftentimes I discover after maybe 10 or 20 minutes after the session starts that there was a very controlling family member in the corner of the room, out of sight of the camera. And this usually this controlling family member was assessing if any negative things were said about him or her. Usually it's a parent, and oftentimes they're so emotionally reactive, I guess in Bowenian terms, that they cannot conceal their identity for the whole duration of session. And when they hear something they don't like, they just jump in screaming. And that's I've developed this protocol of asking as soon as the session starts if there's any person in the room. I've even requested that clients need to be in a confidential area. Unfortunately, here in rural Nevada, that's not always possible, because a lot of the families, they live in these single wide trailers that are smaller than walk-in closets. Um, Also, many of my clients do live in those drug houses, the meth houses, and meth being a very big thing out here in Nye County. And there's always all these strange people impulsively coming in and out of rooms in the background, and obviously they're in an altered state. So yeah, I think there needs to be a class that gives a heads up to a lot of these clinicians that boundaries have to be very stern, and sometimes they need to know that you have to discontinue or cut off therapy that day if they can't keep it confidential, the environment confidential, and um, I think the intern should know that they should expect this, in a class that teaches that would be very beneficial. That it also teaches possible ethics violations they may see on app-based therapies, technology-based therapies, and how to resolve the problems according to AMFT standards. Talkspace is very, very popular amongst millennials. Demographic information shows that millennials use the service at very, very high rates. They received a very big increase in clientele around 2016, actually exactly November 9th, 2016, after the elections. I recall that the day after Trump had won the election, I had a line out the door at my practice, and I'd never seen a line that big for people who needed to be seen. A lot of people were very, very upset that Trump won. Lots of people thought they were going to lose their rights, they were going to lose their marriage, their citizenship. There was a lot of anxiety amongst millennials, and especially amongst college students, and there certainly was a lot of panic at that moment. Except for her, obviously, she secretly voted for Trump. So around early 2017, Talkspace got into a little bit more heat regarding ethics issues. Both the ACA's Code of Ethics and the AMFT's Code of Ethics has a big issue regarding exploiting clients for financial gain. Um, they have a big issue against certain unethical advertising procedures. Well, the millennials started to put up these blogs regarding their struggles with mental health issues, like living with social anxiety disorder or living with bipolar disorder. And some of these blogs were actually quite cringy. They were um, they were articulating a lot of their personal pains and struggles and issues, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It really does fight stigma, but some of them were very unusual, if I may say. For example,
Hi there, my name is Becky, and I suffer from generalized anxiety disorder. Generalized anxiety disorder. Generalized anxiety disorder. Generalized anxiety disorder.
I really think it's a little more than generalized anxiety disorder. But So this girl up here is a very popular very popular blogger, and she accidentally revealed that Talkspace actually goes around looking for these type of blogs from these millennials, the ones that I just kind of demonstrated, the ones I just showed, and they contact them and they give them money to make another blog based on how Talkspace is so much better than brick and mortar therapy. Now, this does violate both the ACA and the AMFT's Code of Ethics. In these classes, I think that focus on incorporating Talkspace and certain things to watch out when working in technology-based psychotherapy approaches. I feel like it's important to let um, the interns and the students know that most of these technology-based psychotherapy apps are for profit, and you're going to see a lot of things at for-profit agencies that contradict the codes of ethics. The business side wants you to do certain things, like misdiagnose people so they can get more services, according to some insurances. But the clinical side doesn't. So therefore, I feel like it's important to teach the students that you need to form a very strong working relationship with the clinical director, and I think that's important. A peer in my class told me that it's common for Talkspace clients to be very boundary intrusive. They feel like they own you as a therapist because they pay up front, prior to any sessions. Also, they tend to send way more texts than meets the initial agreement. I think that in these classes, it's important to teach certain tactics to deal with these type of intrusive clients. For example, any theory can help the client process this behavior and ideally, hopefully, stop it. So, like more of a analytical approach would attempt to interpret the behavior through some kind of transference or genetic interpretation, without having to set stern rules. This surely can work. Some clinicians may even prefer to say, "Hey, you got to stop, or I'm done," which of course may be perceived as abandonment or conditional regard. The texting could also be a projective identification, and by you saying, "Hey, I'm annoyed by you, I can't deal with you no more," you're actually falling victim to that projective identification and playing out a role that he was trying to recreate from maybe like a childhood conflict with his parents. You could certainly deal with that through some kind of interpretation, and I think that classes like that should maybe perhaps prepare the not students, I'm sorry, with strategies on how to deal with this. I know I'm going over my time right now, but there's only one last thing I really wanted to cover about teaching, incorporating Talkspace into the classroom setting. And Talkspace advertises tremendously on an advantage that they perceive, that you can switch therapists anytime you want if you're not working well with them. Unfortunately, I feel this enables the clients. The problem is that if they switch therapists the moment they get disappointed, it may facilitate the problem forever. I mean, what if the issue is related to splitting or a lack of object constancy? What if the person has a problem of idealizing and then devaluing? And that's where their interpersonal conflicts and inability to maintain relationships comes from. I think unrealistic expectations of others. If the client just switches, then well, we can never work through the transference reaction, and which is causing the problem. Probably one of the advantages, the last advantages of Talkspace is that it focuses a lot on crisis management rather than long-term insight. So I think that it's very important to teach the people the clinicians who are um, using Talkspace, crisis management skills. Okay, that's the end of it. Thanks so much, guys, and it was great going to school at Chicago School. I guess this is my last class, so long.